Well, welcome again. And thank you to SLN and to Michaela for the invitation to be here. I'm going to keep my part short because I know I am definitely not the reason that you are all tuned in. My name is Miles Engel. I am a professor at North Carolina State University in Raleigh, North Carolina. And that is where I first came to know Michaela about, what was it, 8 or so years ago. I
Yeah.
was assigned to be her academic advisor, and thus I worked with her throughout her 4 years of college in that capacity. I also taught her 2 courses during that time, so I got to know her pretty well, very luckily. I think my first connection, my first introduction to Michaela was through an email that she wrote to me, and it was her wanting to meet with me to discuss study abroad opportunities. Now, given that most students don't think about study abroad opportunities until a year or two into their college career, I thought that was pretty telling. I think Michaela has always had this eye to the wider world and a desire to get out there in it, exploring and making a difference. And so, of course, that's what she has done since she graduated. She's had internships with a couple of prestigious zoos. She's worked with Yerkes Primate Research Center in Atlanta. And of course, then she followed those with her research experiences in Belize and the Congo, which she's going to talk about today. And I know that you will clearly recognize the passion that she has for issues surrounding conservation, for human wildlife conflict and interactions. I think Michaela is really committed to a personal as well as a scientific research approach to field research. And with that goal in mind, I think she uses her gifts for things like wildlife photography, for storytelling, for her, obviously, just her warm personality, her willingness to embrace other perspectives, and to kind of make real connections with people and the communities where these conservation issues are so critical. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Michaela and let her share some of her experiences with these wonderful programs and initiatives in Belize and the DRC. And quick note, reminder to please enter any questions that you may have throughout the talk into the chat, and we'll make sure that she can address those at some point. Thanks. All right, Michaela.
Thank you, Dr. Engel, for the lovely introduction. Hello, everybody. My name is Michaela Foley. I currently work as a research assistant in field biology and conservation. I'm here to talk to you about my experiences in long-term data research in remote field stations. Okay, so a little bit of background on myself. I'm from New York in the United States. I have always wanted to work in field conservation and animal behavior, most specifically. So to pursue that, I attended North Carolina State University and got a bachelor's in science in zoology. Afterwards, as Dr. Engel mentioned, I worked at a couple zoos, AZ8 accredited facilities throughout the United States. I was a primate keeper. Zoo Atlanta was my last position. Afterwards, I focused back on my primary goal of working in field research and conservation, first with the Belize Jaguar project as a research assistant, and then after as a senior research assistant with the LuiKotale Bonobo project. The picture in the corner, I have a bonobo skull, which it was a fun project that we excavated recovered remains of a bonobo that we had kept at the project. So that's not a human skull, sorry. It's a bonobo skull. Just wanted to preface that. So just a little bit of background about where Belize and the Democratic Republic of the Congo are. Belize is located on the Yucatan Peninsula between Mexico, Guatemala, and Honduras. It's a relatively small country by landmass, but most of the country is now protected forest reserves, and it's a largely intact connectivity forest throughout the Yucatan Peninsula. So it's a small area by landmass, but very important conservation area, and then the Democratic Republic of the Congo, on the other hand, is one of the largest countries in Africa, and it holds the Congo Basin, which is one of the most important ecosystems globally. So both of these areas have lots of similarities, even though they're on opposite sides of the world. They're both equatorial forests, and they are very unique and important ecosystems for the global systems. And both of these projects, just a little bit of background, are long-term study sites. So typically a long-term field site is maybe around 5 years. A study can be considered a long-term field site. Both the Belize Jaguar project and the LuiKotale Bonobo project have been operating for more than 20 years. They both started in the early 2000s. They're run by the same people that founded them, and they've been taking place in the same location that they were founded. So definitely cuts down on issues of parachute science that sometimes can be a problem in ecology and animal behavior. Both of these projects have flagship species that are elusive and understudied. So even though the ecosystems are plays key roles in their in the surrounding like global systems, they're not well studied, they're very remote locations. So it's really important that there's a strong, stable presence of science basically in these areas because we don't know a lot about them, but we do know that they're important. They have mosaic ecosystems, endemic species, really unique fauna and flora that aren't found in other areas of the world. And both of these projects focus very heavily on community involvement and environmental education, focusing on education programs for the project, but also just general environmental education and community support, which these projects would not have been around for so long and so successful if they didn't have this community support. So those are both really important factors. So the Belize Jaguar project is run by Dr. Marcella Kelly from Virginia Tech University. She established it in 2001, so early 2000s. Primarily, the project focuses on Jaguar and Puma research, but also ocelot and margay, which are also less studied. The Central American populations are very important for these species, even though they're found all throughout the Americas. Central America populations are very important for the connectivity of genetics, and the Belize is likely to have the larger populations of jaguar and puma, especially because there's so much intact forest remaining in the country, but again, less studied. So that's some of the importance of the occupational modeling and the population monitoring that this project looks at. And also, we look at a lot of habitat and human disturbance influences on population dynamic, which is of course, a huge science question now for all projects around the world focusing on human wildlife interactions is just how are the populations even affected in general. The IX in front of the Belize Jaguar project, and if you can see on the top right corner, the symbol for the project there is pronounced Ish, and it's the Mayan symbol for jaguar from the ancient Maya civilization. So it just reflects Dr. Kelly's strong cultural ties since the inception of the project. She wanted to make sure that she included the history of the locations because there's a lot of cultural importance in these forests as well for the old ancient Mayan settlements. So the Belize Jaguar project focused primarily on camera trapping along foot trails and logging roads throughout the different forests. In the summer location, there's approximately 160 camera traps all throughout the Mayan forest corridor. They're set up for at least 2 to 3 months every summer. In the winter, she does camera traps in another location, but I did not work on that, so I will not focus on that. But in the summer, over 160 different locations throughout different areas of the forest that I will show later. So in addition to the occupation modeling and just population dynamics, we also look at the impacts that sustainable lumber selection have, military use, ecotourism, agriculture. These are all factors that are affecting the current facets of the forest and how those are affecting the animals around. And then the project also does community presentations, mini workshops on the camera trapping stations, what we do for data, so specific things to the project, but then also just the environmental history of the area, why things are so important, and the role that their communities play in the global conservation community. In the top left corner is a picture of a Yucatan black howler monkey that I took, which is just, it's a it's a nice picture, but it's also reflects how important, focusing on these flagship charismatic species also helps protect these other less well-known species. They're endemic to the Yucatan Peninsula. They're super endangered, but they cohabitate with the carnivores, so that's extra protection. So the Yucatan Peninsula has unique formations throughout the forest. We're going to focus on the two that concern the project. So the broadleaf forest is part of the Maya Forest corridor. The area where the study takes place in Gallenjug is protected by the Belize Maya Forest Trust, which is a nonprofit that bought the land from former logging companies. So historically, this has been a heavily logged area, and that's why it's one of the main focuses of the project. So there's also a lot of agriculture in the area, ecotourism, and the Belizean and the UK military use it for jungle training. So there's a lot of human presence in these forests, yet the animal populations are still thriving. Here, we also do some camera traps in the pine savanna, which is in the nearby, the bordering Rio Bravo Conservation Management Area, which is run by Program for Belize. So there's a lot of nonprofits that work together throughout Belize to protect these areas. They work with the government, all that stuff. So a lot of interdisciplinary research concerns. Here, there's the Hillbank Research Station. There's more ecotourism. There's also more active logging in this area. So these are the places that we actually will set up the camera traps. Here's some of our results. So a typical day for the researchers. It's a mix of international students and researchers, Belizean students as well. We will go out in the morning. We'll go out almost every day, go out in the morning, set up camera stations, check the camera stations every 2 weeks, pretty standard, make sure the batteries are fine. Also, we have to clear some trails. So a lot of machete work to get through the jungle, especially in the areas where logging isn't as prevalent anymore. The loggers aren't bulldozing the big trails for the cats to use as highways anymore. So we have to cut through ourselves to set up the camera traps in the same places that they've always been, which is a great asset for, it's a great asset that the project has been around for so long, because now we can really see the progression of how things were when that logging was active. And then as the logging decreases, how that affects how the cats move through the forest, how they use it, all that stuff. So the bottom corners represent how the camera traps look. In the middle is a coati mom with some cute babies, and that also just highlights how so many different species that are unique to Central America and the Americas use these areas, and how protecting and studying the jaguars and the pumas affect all the species in the forest. In the bottom center is a jaguar holding an armadillo, which is a really rare picture for the project to get. It's well known that jaguars do eat armadillos, but it's pretty rare for the project to get them on camera. So even though it's a blurry picture, I really like when you can see the special events, everyone gets really excited, and that's nice to see, especially after a long day of chopping in the forest. And when you check the camera traps, you see something cool, everyone gets really excited. So here's some pictures to reflect the logging presence in the forest. This is one of the heavier areas for sure. And then one of the less chopped trails in the beginning. That's not what we're chopping with a machete, though. The picture in the middle, it's not what it looks like when we cut our way through. But it is interesting to see how sustainable lumber selection still is in Belize, how sustainable it can be in the future, and then how timber selection can help protect the forest from slash and burn agriculture. These are all factors that are taken into consideration when looking at forest utilization with the carnivores. Here's some pictures of, on the left, the picture, it's just water vapor, that's not smoke, but in the middle, that is smoke. So the left-hand picture, this is a progression. The left-hand picture is regular clear forest. The middle is a helicopter picture of a active forest fire. And then on the right-hand side is a cleared agricultural field. So you can see on the hills where the forest is still intact. And then there's kind of the strict barrier in between where agriculture starts. And the Belize Maya Forest Trust works really hard to manage the national process of forest fires because it is a natural part of the ecosystem. But you do have to balance that with protecting the limited boundaries of the forest that's still intact. So they work really hard to manage that, and they do well. And then this is my transition slide into LuiKotale, but this is one of my favorite pictures. I just really want to point out that there's a little butterfly above. That's Susie and Salonga, which is Salonga after the national park. So these are some of my favorites, but I like the little butterfly. Anyway, I digress. So the LuiKotale Bonobo project is has been founded by Dr. Barbara Firth and Dr. Gottfried Hohmann. They currently run it through the Max Planck Institute for Animal Behavior in the Department of Bonobo Behavioral Ecology. Officially, it was established in 2002. They returned to the Congo after the Second Congo War they had done earlier field research at a different site, and then they reestablished this one at LuiKotale. LuiKotale it means long life, and it was a former village site that the villagers weren't using it anymore. They had established a village in another location, so this was already a known spot where people can live. So it was nice. Yeah, LuiKotale means long life. The project focuses on bonobo behavior and life history primarily, but also physiological genetic data, general biomonitoring in the forest, and ecological surveys. So right now there's a canopy survey where they have camera traps and a photographer climbing up in the trees to study what's in the Congo Basin canopy, because there's only so much that you can learn from the ground. So many of the different unique animals to the Congo Basin live in the canopy, spend most of their lives up there. So it's one of the ways that the Bonobo project is able to contribute to general biomonitoring. But the primary focus, the stars, the bonobos, we follow habituated bonobos because there's so many different behaviors that you just have to be up close to properly study. So there's two communities right now. There's over 100 individuals in both, and then they're currently working on habituating another community at a different field site that's about 12 kilometers away or so. But West Bompusa is the first habituated community, and it is the much larger one. Now it's well over 60 individuals. And then the East Bompusa community is around 30, including different migratory individuals, migrant females that can move between the two communities, which I'll get into more later. But yeah, Barbara and Gottfried are down at the bottom. So LuiKotale is located in the Salonga National Park buffer zone. It's not part of Salonga National Park proper. You can see in the bottom left corner that LuiKotale is located around the edge. So it is protected forest under contract with supporting villages, and we really work with the people in the local communities a lot. The research team there's a constant research present year-round at LuiKotale, and is located 20 kilometers from the nearest village. So in addition to just logistical support, porters, cooks, repairmen. That's the main support staff from the communities, but there's also the trackers. We call them bonobists, which I love. I think it's super cute. And they work with the research assistants to follow the bonobos. We follow them for 12 hours in the forest from the morning nest to the night nest. It's usually around 12 hours. And then it's another 2 or 3 hours back and forth from the nest. So all in all, we spend around 16 hours in the forest every day. And the local guys are right there with the internationals. And yeah, they're a huge help. They work on the eco schedule with us and they collect data as well. So they're yeah, just more community support that this project would not be possible without them. The Congo Basin also has unique features, and very unique mosaic topography. The bonobos range a lot further than chimps do on average, and a lot further than gorillas do. So they're definitely speedy great apes. So you can go to a bunch of different parts of the forest in one day, which is really pretty, but it's not always the most fun. On the right-hand side is some of the swamps that we go to with lots of the mud. This is more of a unique behavior. They don't eat roots like this so often, so that's why I was really happy I was able to catch this on video. Usually the bonobos go through the day and they look totally clean. They're unfazed by the mud. They somehow don't get dirty. They definitely don't get wet when we cross rivers, but here you can actually see them roll up their sleeves and get in the mud with us. The center picture is a picture of our camp, so it's a break in the canopy, but for the most part, it's complete canopy cover that we're under. And then there's one of the larger rivers that, like I said, the bonobos don't swim so much across the larger rivers, but there's smaller rivers that they'll cross to access different parts of their territories. And that is when they will just swing over in the trees, or they'll cross over a fallen tree and be completely dry. And then there's just me underneath with my bag over my head up to my chest in water, trying to hustle after them. I'm sure they're laughing at me, but I like it. It's fun. I do enjoy it. And then there's also savannas that pop up throughout the forest, and each of these unique parts of the ecosystem have different food items that the bonobos will go for, and so that's part of the data we collect on their ranging behaviors and their foraging behaviors. These are the river pools that they access pretty frequently. They're looking for lily pads here, so they'll spend a couple hours eating here, and they go here specifically for this. You know, it's a straight shot. You'll know really early in the morning if the bonobos want to go to the pools that day, because they will just dead sprint to the pools and then go straight back down and probably nest really close to where they nested in the morning and just do a big up and down sprint. But it's really cool to see them in the pools like this. And this is where they do get wet, but as you can see, they kind of hang on the edge to make sure that they don't fall in. So it's more of a controlled environment, I think, than the rivers. So the bonobos distinguish themselves with a lot of rare behaviors for great apes. So there's a very large ethogram to try to capture and quantify these behaviors correctly. We take party compositions of who's with who throughout the day, especially since the communities are so large. They don't usually move as a unit. You will see the whole group together of, you know, maybe 70 bonobos running around, but usually they move through smaller groups and it's a fission fusion. So they will go in and out, and you'll see someone for a couple hours and you won't see them again for the rest of the day. You might not see them for a couple months. So we keep track of who's with who, what food they eat, the locations of different feeding trees. So we take GPS data on that and different foraging behaviors, and then their general range, which we keep track of. The project runs a herbarium for food items to classify what foods they're eating and how. And then also there's a phylogeny project that Congolese botanists from the local communities run every month. We also take urine and fecal samples for different projects, pregnancy tests. We try to keep on pretty regularly to monitor the reproductive cycles of different females. There's hormone studies, genetics. The isotope project is pretty interesting with the fecal samples to see what at what age weaning occurs, and then when does milk consumption start, and then it's just a comfort behavior. So that's a pretty interesting project that they run pretty continuously. The ethogram after 20 years is very extensive. There's a lot of different behaviors that we look at and try to quantify. Grooming, food sharing, aggressive displays, and sexual behaviors are the bigger ones to look at the social connections and the hierarchy between the different individuals. So part of how bonobos distinguish themselves is they're a matriarchy with fetal natal dispersal or female natal dispersal, which means that they have strong social bonds between unrelated females. So even though the males will stay in their birth community for the most part and stay with their mothers throughout their whole lives, the males don't form such strong coalitions, and it's really the females that do. But for the most part, they're unrelated. Some will stay, and the project has run long enough that now we know who is from this community and who has left and come back and is now raising their children among their cousins, which is really interesting to see. And another interesting part is that they don't really exhibit aggression towards immigration. So when new females come into a community, it's not a more like xenophobic situation that you'll see in other primate species. There's very little aggression with immigrant females, especially, and you will see them participate in grooming, food sharing, sexual behaviors pretty early on as part of the early bonding process, which is really interesting to see. And we take all this data on a phone, on a data app, and also on a dictaphone. So that's a fun sight to see of us running after the bonobos with the phone up to our mouth, trying to record the data and also not trip. In addition, so these are all behaviors that the habituation is really important, so we can be up close and really get the details on these behaviors. And then also the focal scans helps us determine the social bonds and the relatedness between different bonobos, because you have to follow an individual for 1 hour and then you record what they're doing every 5 minutes for that hour, and then what everybody around them is doing and how close they are. So in order to do that, you really need to know the individuals, and you really need to be able to follow that individual for an hour and see what they're doing. So that's why habituation is critical for this project. And then some of the other behaviors that we look at are solicitations throughout all of these. So food sharing, sexual behaviors, grooming, you will see the solicitations and we record that. The vocalizations, they have a wide variety of vocalizations that they use in different scenarios. So we record that as best we can. Obviously, play is looping on the right because that's super cute. And then bark stripping is one of the interesting behaviors that the project looks at to see if there's any medicinal component or tool use, what they're doing with that, because they'll strip bark from trees, they'll strip bark from different lianas, and that's cool to see kind of bark stripping, tool use, things that previously were thought of to only belong in humans. To see that in person is really cool. So to highlight some of the unique behaviors that we see for bonobos, grooming, huge component of bonding behavior. The duration is really important that we look at. The hand clasps is what they're doing in the picture and in the video. So that kind of indicates quality of grooming is sort of how we look at when we're looking at duration, hand clasp, mutual grooming often accompanies the hand clasp. They also make a kissing sound, which is kind of like a lip smack. And these are all things that we look at and record to see what the situation is. Then the males will also, so females will groom males, males will groom males, males will groom juveniles. Everybody is grooming. It's a very significant behavior for bonding and cohesion within the community. Obviously, you can see based on the hierarchy, some of the outside males don't groom as much as the dominant females, but everybody gets groomed at some point. And you can also see self-grooming in the corner. Sometimes the older males especially don't want to be bothered with the kids running around. Sometimes it gets a little crazy. Now, this behavior is a sexual behavior called genitogenital. We call it Gigi rubbing. It's part of why bonobos have the moniker as the hippies of great apes. Sexual behavior outside of sexual reproduction is very important for bonobo society, and this female-female sexual behavior is prevalent in basically every activity for bonobo society. They do it during food shares, when they're excited, in intergroup community encounters sometimes, in intra-group fusions. You know, if they haven't seen members of their same community for a little bit, they get excited. And this is usually accompanied by an open mouth grin, which is what the female on the bottom is doing. Lots of high-pitched vocalizations. There's a lot of different thoughts about why they do this and how it got started, but in general, it's seen as a very intense bonding behavior, and it's very prevalent in all parts of the society. Males also have their own equivalent, which is a little rare, but they'll do rump to rump. So, and then the males and females will also do copulations just for excitement. So that's fun to see. And it's a very normal part of bonobo society. You can see Uma's daughter on the bottom is not really bothered about what's happening. And this is also an interesting component of with the immigrant females. So this, the bonobo on the bottom is an immigrant female. The one on the top is a more dominant male. She's a very successful mother. She's been around the community for a long time. So the two of them are, you know, bonding, they're getting along, no problems. And Yaya she's been a part of the community for a long time though. Bonobos, the females technically leave, or they typically leave around 7 or 9 years of age, right before sexual maturity. And some of the migrant females, you know, they'll be in and out. You'll see them for a couple weeks and you won't see them for a while. Sometimes they come back, sometimes you never see them again. And then after a while, they will become a steady presence in the community. And typically, they're considered a permanent member of the community when they successfully give birth, when they bring a pregnancy to full term, is the general consensus. This is an open mouth grin with a lip curl. So this is another appeasement behavior. It's part of, we look at it as part of aggressions and displays as well, because even though bonobos have the hippie moniker, they are not all peace and love. They do still have aggressions and displays. Branch drags is a big one that they'll do, where they will take a branch, they'll snap a new sapling, or they'll take a branch from the ground and they'll drag it towards each other. Not hitting, that is not usually a direct contact, but it's can be seen as a show of strength and also as a direction, like, hey guys, let's go this way, maybe trying to get the group to follow them in a certain direction is typically what the males will do more, but the females do it as well. Buttress drums on the roots of trees as a big vocal display, and then typical chase and physical violence is still prevalent in bonobo society, but maybe a little bit less so, and maybe a little bit more on the bonding behaviors. They also were not vegetarian. It was thought for a little bit that they were vegetarian, since they are the peaceful hippies compared to chimps, but they do hunt. Some groups hunt more than others, but they'll hunt red colobus monkeys, duikers, which are local small antelopes. I've seen them go after squirrels, birds. One juvenile, ironically named Gandhi, went after a Potomac red river hog piglet, but he didn't actually eat it. He just kind of played around with it, and that was really interesting. I wasn't there that day, but it was we were all been talking about it. It was really interesting because the adults were completely unbothered and did not pay attention to Gandhi with the piglet at all. So I don't know if they didn't see it as a food source, they just weren't interested in it. So even though meat isn't as staple a part of their diet as us, per se, or typical omnivores, they do still partake pretty regularly. And then in defense of bonobo dental hygiene, their teeth are not black because they're rotted. They're stained teeth. They're stained from, we call it THV, terrestrial herbaceous vegetation that they eat. And it's one of their main food sources. It's everywhere in the forest. Just different. There's different species and different parts are in different or different species are in different parts of the mosaic forest, but there is THC everywhere and they're eating it constantly, and that's what stains their teeth. So the babies will have it pretty early once they start dabbling in solid food. It gets stained pretty quickly. So it's not that they're rotted, they have strong teeth. Now, circling back to community involvement for both of these projects, as I mentioned, it's pretty supportive on both sides. So this is the Casey Community School in Sylvester Village, which is within the Gallon Jug property. This is where we do the mini workshop. So we show them the camera traps. We also will go into wildlife conservation, but maybe not more important, but equally important is we'll just discuss the general environmental education of the area. So explaining what's a part of their forest, why the kids should care about it, and how important their community is to global conservation as a whole. And the kids are always super into it. They love to play with the camera traps, the whole 9 yards. And then the parents of these kids will also help us with chopping in the forest. They'll help us clear trails when they have the spare time just to hang out with us. So that's really nice. And then Bonobo Alive is the nonprofit that was established by Dr. Firth and Dr. Homan to support the LuiKotale Bonobo project. They do a lot of different projects. They do biomonitoring initiatives throughout the Salonga buffer zone. So that is part of the look into sustainable hunting processes. They will look at the canopy project, that sort of thing. They also help fund anti-hunting patrols with the Institut Congolais pour la conservation des nature. The ICCN, they work with the locals in the villages as well to monitor their privately protected forests, and they will document instances of hunting within the protected areas. And then, as you can see at the bottom, they will take out the cable snares. Those aren't all ours, I think, but it's a very striking image to see all the cable snares and some of the local weaponry that can be found in these forests. It's mostly in the area subsistence farming and hunting. So it's not really large scale agriculture or large scale bushmeat trade so much, but the bonobos will get caught in the cable snares that aren't usually meant for them, but they still will sometimes lose fingers, lose hands. So it is a significant threat to them, and just the presence of humans in the forest in general is the main tete-a-tete. They don't have other natural predators so much. But also presence supporting the villages. So Bonobo Alive will help with school supplies, education objectives. They will do education programs. They'll help with medical bills for people working with the project, that kind of thing. Just the general trying to support the community as much as the community supports the project. So that is the end of my slides. This is this is Salonga earlier. It was Susie and Sequoia, her younger sister. These are my favorites, so I have them in a lot of my slides, but she's a cutie. But anyway, so thank you so much for the Snow Leopard Network for having me today. It was truly a privilege, and thank you to the Belize Jaguar Project for letting me speak about it today, the different nonprofits, Program for Belize Maya Forest Trust, everyone that helps fund the project, and also for LuiKotale, the Max Planck Institute, Bonobo Alive, the ICCN for working with the project. Thank you again. My references.
Thank you, Michaela. That was great. All right, so I was going to ask for some questions, and they're starting to come in. So, first question is, did you experience any challenges as a woman working in these remote locations? Did you feel anything there, any threats or dangers or particular challenges?
Not so much, and I mean that's always on your mind, especially working. These field trips are in very remote areas in the forest, so that is definitely on your mind. But no, not really. Everyone in the community was in community in Belize and in the Congo were super, super welcoming. They have no problem, hanging out with internationals that are a lot younger than them. And also, even though the projects have been around for so long, the research assistants still come and go. They're only there for a couple months. I was in the Congo for a year, but I was only in Belize for 2 months. So, the communities are still just as welcoming no matter how long your stay, which is really nice. I will recognize that I am 6 feet tall, and so I'm a little bit bigger than most women. So I was able to, little maybe it's like an intimidation factor with that. They're not used to seeing a really large white woman in the forest because that's is not so normal. But no, long story short is no, I didn't have any problems. Everyone was amazing.
Okay, great. Well, kind of following up with that, the community and Rocky, I was wanting to ask this question as well, that you talked about how supportive the community was of all the efforts. And do you feel like I guess my question too was like, how did that come to be? These long-term projects obviously required the community to invest in them. So education certainly would be a part of it, maybe jobs. What else is it that is unique to these programs that has enabled that level of community support?
Yeah, definitely. It's a high level of support in both, which is really nice. I think jobs definitely and education, but also just the culture of both communities. They live in the forest. They don't really have access to the internet in their towns. Obviously, like everyone has phones, and you travel to visit family, and you get the internet there, but it is definitely a slower pace of life in these areas, and they have a lot of respect for the forest. And so they want to protect their areas and their way of life because they have really strong traditions in the forest. They enjoy the forest. If they didn't want to keep living there, they could. It is possible for them to change careers. It is 2025, so they can move to other areas if they really, really hated it. But everybody there, for the most part, they respect the forest and they want to help protect it as well. So they get jobs through the project and different opportunities for education with the project, but they also want to protect their own backyard for their own future generations.
That's great. And the cultural connection, especially in Belize that you talked about, I'm sure that was a piece of it too, that they respect, that the programs come in and really respect those cultures, which certainly is something. Richard asked if the Coxcomb Basin project in Belize is still going on, if you know about that, because he was wondering if maybe that's a long-term project as well.
Yes, the Coxcomb Basin is one, it's in the south. It's one of the larger forest reserves in the country. But the Belize Jaguar project doesn't do so much there now. I think maybe they had in the past, but in the summer they're in the Belize Maya Forest Corridor, and then in the winter they're in the mountain pine forest, a little bit further south, but still more like central Belize. Um, so I'm not sure. Sorry.
Okay. Next question is about consistency when you have all these research assistants, like you mentioned, coming and going for short periods of time to keep the data consistent and make sure that it is organized and everyone knows what's going on. So can you
Yeah.
talk a little bit about the working methods for each project in terms of that?
Yeah, so that is definitely one of the major issues for a long-term data survey is to maintain the quality over such a long period of time. For Belize, it's a little different because the research assistants in the field aren't collecting and analyzing data. That's done by graduate students in the States. So for us, we're really just setting up the camera traps and clearing the trails and going through maybe doing a little bit of organization, but not really hard data analytics. So that isn't so much of an issue. It's just more making sure that we're consistent in where the camera traps are set up as best we can and that they're there for this adequate amount of time. In LuiKotale, that is a big concern. So you spend the first 3 months in LuiKotale training, working on IDs, working on data collection, and we really rely on each other in camp to hold ourselves accountable for our quality of data before we send it out to Europe. And then once it goes to Germany, then the graduate students at the Max Planck Institute will also go through and ensure quality in data, that it's as consistent as possible. So that is definitely a major concern for both projects. I would say in LuiKotale, it's kind of a two-step process where in camp we try to hold ourselves accountable for quality data, and then as the safe back in Germany is the graduate students will also clean the data.
You talked about one of the first things you do is learn to ID the bonobos.
Yes.
And I would think both that as well as getting super familiar with the ethogram and being able to
Mhm.
clearly identify specific behaviors, that's time consuming. So that already says you don't want a research assistant there for a month because they wouldn't be able to do that, right?
Yeah. In LuiKotale, usually you're hired for 9 months is kind of the average. If you come in as say a master's student or a PhD student, it could be less, it could be 5 months or so. But yeah, it's at least 6 months is kind of the golden minimum because you spend 3 months training. And then so I spent a little bit of extra time. So I spent 6 months as or I spent 9 months as a regular assistant and then a senior assistant. But the first 3 months, that's the hardest part, I think, is the IDs for me. Everyone asks me about living in the Congo. They think, oh, was it running or was it the food that was the hardest part? And really it was just the IDs was the hardest adjustment because until you have the IDs down, you can't really get going with the data. You still learn the ethogram, you still learn the behaviors, but you need to know who is doing what before you can really say, record what they're doing.
Mhm. So that's where that organization is important too, because you pass that down to the next group that's coming along so that they can identify
Yeah.
them
And
easily.
that's another, the IDs is another handoff that's really important between like each year and each generation of research assistants because as I mentioned, the project's been going around for so long, we'll have females emigrate out and then immigrate back in. Or different migrant females will hop between groups. So one will be in this part of the forest in west, and then 4 days later she's with you in east, like 30 kilometers away. And how did she get there so fast? But
Gosh.
you have to make sure that especially the individuals that you see less frequently, that you maintain their identification integrity. So that's another crucial part. But that's where also some of the graduate students will that have worked on the project as field assistants in the past, they will come back for the project for a couple months to help with training. And also everyone, Dr. Firth, Dr. Holman, the graduate students in Germany are very readily accessible by shortwave radio email since we don't have internet. So I don't know how readily accessible that is, but there's a great support system from Germany, stays in a lot of contact with everybody in the forest.
That's great. All right, I'm going to save the unexpected challenges and discoveries for the towards the end. I think that's a great one. But how about biggest threats for both of the species in terms of as well as like hunting? Is that something that is a big concern in terms of hunting of these species in each place, or is the community helping to kind of keep that under control?
Yes, as far as I know, in both of these specific areas, hunting of the target study species is less prevalent. It's not really the primary concern for either project. It's more the human interactions with the forest and how that affects their population. So agriculture and hunting of other species. Um, Mostly it's yeah, it's the integrity of the forest. That's the biggest issue. Um, yeah, the community doesn't bonobo hunting really isn't a concern for them and as far as I know, not in Belize either. It's more subsistence hunting.
Okay. So more habitat threat than direct. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. How about community involvement? Flavia is asking a follow-up question to that. That's a great question. So do you feel like you've seen any differences or have the program talked about any differences in attitudes of the community or policies directed around conservation as a result of these projects, these long-term projects?
Um, Definitely what I've seen in Belize, you can see a tangible difference. I mean, I wasn't there long enough to see this myself, but you see the kids that grew up around the project are really interested in the project and they want to be involved in conservation work themselves. You know, they grew up with it and so now they want to work for it. And they want to go to university and kind of pursue this themselves. Belize, the education system they have where you test to go to a special high school to for like a field of study if you want. So when I was there, some of the teenagers were taking their tests for high school so they could go work in conservation in the future. So that was really cute to see. And then yeah, it's the same for Congo as well. The project's been around for so long that now kids that were born when the project first started are working on the project, they're involved, they've grown up around it their whole life. So it's really a part of the daily life for them.
Right. Um, there's a question about forest fires that we saw, but I think was that with the in Belize maybe? Or was that
The picture was from Belize. There are still forest fires in Congo as well. They don't spread as far as from what I've seen because well, at least when I was in Belize, there was also a drought. So that was a big factor of trying to keep the fires under control. Is it was I think another year. It was a multiple year drought in the summer. So the forest was super, super dry. In Congo is very, very wet. Even in the dry season, the forest in general, the underlayer is very wet. So they don't spread quite as far. But yeah, the bonobos would definitely run from a fire for sure.
good? That's great. Um, so what about some big takeaways, either challenges or fun discoveries, anything, just something that maybe was a little unexpected from your experience when you went into it that in either or both places?
I think just live in both places, living within a forest in general was really interesting for me. I live in a suburban area. It's not Manhattan, but it's not a rural area. So we have you know, we have red fox and we have deer and that kind of stuff. But to be in a forest constantly, to be just walking on the trail on your commute and bump into wild animals that you're not looking at. In Belize, I was chased by peccaries for a little bit. So, you know, having to stay on your toes and be aware of your surroundings was an interesting change, but I enjoyed it, especially from Congo. The Congo Basin has a lot of really interesting in species that are found in some are found in other places of the world, some not at all. But they have the African forest elephant. So on your morning commute, you know, we'd leave camp at 3 o'clock in the morning and you chug coffee and you're tired. Now you have to go on like a 3 hour hike to start your day. And you have to be careful of forest elephants on your morning commute as not something that you really experience in New York, and then on my way home one day, we were rushing to get home for dinner. We really wanted a shower. We're 10 minutes back from camp, and I almost stepped on a tree pangolin crossing the trail. So, pangolins are one of the most famous and the most heavily poached animals in the world. And I need to see bonobos when I'm in the field. That is, if I'm doing my job properly, I'm seeing bonobos every day I'm in the field. But tree pangolins are not habituated to humans. So the fact that I was just walking down the path and, the animals absolutely use our trails in Congo just as much as they use them in Belize. And so I literally bumped into it, and it was like a cartoon. I put my arm back for the research assistant behind me so he didn't slam into it. And then we just stood there and watched it, and Penguin was completely unbothered, and we just stood there for a full 10 minutes before the other guy we were with was like, "All right, guys, come on, we gotta eat. We're gonna be late." So,
Oh,
usually you're late coming home from work because of traffic in the US, not because you're bumping into a tree pangolin. So those are the things that are unexpected but make it absolutely worth it 100%.
absolutely. So true. All right, quick, another question about fires with jaguars. How do they handle it?
I think it's similar to how the bonobos would handle it. I think it's really an innate behavior in all animals to just run from fire. That can be, I think, a little bit trickier in Belize in the areas where the study takes place because there is a large agricultural practice presence on the outside of these protected areas. So there's maybe less forest for them to run to. But all in all, I think for the most part, they're pretty adept at handling it.
Okay. Um, and then, all right, so what are your next steps? Do you think you'll keep doing this kind of work, or has
Yes,
it scared you
100%.
away from it?
No, I'm in for the long haul. Yeah, so I just recently came back from my year at the LuiKotale Bonobo project. I am hoping to go back to the field soon, and I do want to eventually pursue graduate research and participate in my own field studies. So keeping it pushing in conservation and field ecology for sure. I've wanted to do this since I was maybe 3 or 4, so that's not going to change anytime soon, definitely.
Yay. Well, we're glad. That's great. Any other final questions, chat, or you can unmute and ask if you would prefer what you are working on right now?
Well, right now I'm
Things
not
and things.
working on my own project, so I am potentially I can still be involved with the Max Planck Institute, which would be amazing. But also, I'm just trying to go through all my pictures and try to do some science communication initiatives on my own. I think that's something that as Dr. Engel mentioned, I am really passionate about science communication and wildlife photography. So hopefully to continue bringing my experiences to other people that don't have the access or the ability to participate in this field because it is definitely a labor of love. So just because you can't do it doesn't mean you're not interested. So if I can bring my experiences to other people, that's definitely something I'd like to work on now as well.
Yeah, that's great. Oh, there's another question here about the logging. Yeah, so you mentioned that it was a planned exercise and the trees were marked. So wondering if those logged areas are still habitable afterwards and what returns to them and that sort of a thing. Are you familiar with that?
Um, yeah, so that I'm a little less familiar with, but in general, it's interesting because Belize has had a very heavy logging practice for the last like 400 years. There's been pretty consistent logging in these areas, yet the forest is still largely intact because there's the specific trees, old growth trees that they're looking for. They want mahogany and all that kind of stuff, and they need the trees to be big to log them. So that is something that's interesting to see that even though they are taking trees out of the forest and paving, or not paving, but cutting these big roads through it, they do still need a forest to log. So I think that's an interesting history to look at, that it does, they take from the forest, but it also helps maintain the forest. But that isn't something that the project like specifically is researching right now, but it is interesting.
That is, that they still have the stewardship of the forest, even though they are, threatening some habitat in the process, they are trying to maintain it as well. Yeah.
Mhm.
Interesting. All right. Any other final thoughts or questions for Michaela? It's great. Lots of thanks for sharing your experiences, Michaela. It
Thank
is.
you so much for participating and listening to me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, that was wonderful. Thanks so much. We enjoyed it.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Michaela and Miles. That was amazing. We enjoyed it as well, and we learned a lot. And thank you, Michaela, for sharing your experiences with us. And I hope that we've inspired some of our early career researchers also to get motivated to follow in your footsteps. It was really, really amazing.
Yeah, again, thank you guys so much. And if anybody has any other questions for me, please don't hesitate to reach out. If you think of something later, or what have you, please reach out.
Yeah, you can email me and I can forward it on to Michaela.
Perfect. Thank you.
That's great. That's great.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks.
Bye. Have a great day, you guys.